So picture this. It's 1954, right in the middle of the Cold War, and there's an Anglo-Indian grandmother sitting in suburban Australia writing a letter.
Right.
And she's not writing about the weather or, the local neighborhood gossip.
No, definitely not.
No, she is writing this absolutely blistering critique of American global hegemony.
It's so good.
It really is. She actually suggests that the United States should just tear down the Statue of Liberty and replace it with a giant monument to Mammon, the biblical embodiment of greed.
Yeah, holding a hydrogen bomb in one hand and a vial of poisonous germs in the other.
Yes, exactly. Just this incredibly vivid, intense imagery. And I bring this up because today we are looking at why the most radical acts of historical rebellion, they aren't always found in official political treaties.
Right, they aren't in museums.
Exactly. Sometimes they're hiding in faded family photo albums or handed down recipes or, like this, an angry letter tucked away in an attic.
It completely shatters how we usually interact with history, to be honest.
Probably.
Because, we tend to like our history to be visible, officially sanctioned, nicely categorized into timelines.
Neatly boxed up.
Right. But when you step into the world of colonialism, migration, and mixed heritage, those neat little timelines just fall apart completely.
They really do. And that is exactly why we're here today. Welcome to this deep dive. We are so glad to have you, the learner, here with us. We know you love getting to the bottom of complex ideas without just, drowning in information overload.
Absolutely.
And the source we have guiding us today is just phenomenal. It's an academic paper, but it's an autoethnography titled Counter-Genealogies of Belonging by Dr. Vec Lewis.
And, autoethnography is such a powerful tool because it just flat out refuses to separate the personal from the political.
Right.
Dr. Lewis is taking her own family archive, so intimate letters, childhood memories, family photographs, and she's using them as a lens to rigorously analyze Anglo-Indian identity.
Yeah.
And the pressures of gender and the very concept of multiculturalism. It's not just some dry historical account. It's a living document.
It is. So our mission for this deep dive is to explore what it actually means to belong when you fall through the cracks of empires and nations. We want to see how uncovering these hidden counter-genealogies can completely rewire the way you view global history, and maybe even your own family's roots.
I think it will, honestly.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to truly understand the Anglo-Indian community, we actually have to start with how they were intentionally manufactured by the state.
Manufactured is the perfect word for it.
Right. The paper introduces this concept called empire pedagogy. So how exactly does an empire teach someone to be a subject?
Well, to understand empire pedagogy, we really have to look at how the British colonial system operated. They didn't just want to rule a population.
Yes, they wanted to mold one.
Exactly. They wanted to engineer a specific kind of identity that would serve their logistical needs. So we have to go way back to the 18th century.
Okay.
To institutions like Kitterpore House in Bengal, which was set up in 1782.
Wow, so very early on.
Very early. And we shouldn't think of these places as just schools or orphanages. They functioned as literal laboratories for social engineering.
Okay, that sounds incredibly clinical. Like, what was the actual mechanism of that engineering? Who were they experimenting on?
They were specifically targeting illegitimate mixed-race children. So the colonial state would take these kids, including Dr. Lewis's own ancestor, a boy named Frederick Grant.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they would deliberately remove them from their native Muslim mothers, who the British called bibis.
Right.
The whole mechanism was separation. The explicit goal was to sever that local maternal connection completely and replace it with total, unquestioning allegiance to the British Empire.
So the state just effectively becomes their parent.
Exactly.
That's brutal. They're stripping away half of their heritage by force. But the paper also points out that the empire didn't treat all these kids the exact same way, right? It mentions this gendered bifurcation.
Yeah, the severe one.
Which essentially means they split the curriculum entirely based on whether you were a boy or a girl.
Absolutely. The pedagogy was ruthlessly gendered because, well, the empire had different utilitarian needs for men and women.
Right.
The boys were subjected to intense military discipline. They were funneled into scout troops, cadet corps, that sort of thing.
Like a boot camp.
Exactly like a boot camp.
Yeah.
Trained for absolute obedience and hierarchy because they were being molded to fill minor colonial administration roles. You know, the railways, the postal service, the military.
The empire basically needed a reliable middle management class.
Yes.
It's like they created an assembly line to manufacture perfect cogs for the colonial machine.
That's a great way to put it.
They needed people who were local enough to actually survive the climate and navigate the environment, but British enough in their minds to enforce the rules without question.
Spot on.
But the girls, they got a totally different assembly line, right?
Completely. The girls were strictly trained for what the paper calls Christian domesticity. So their curriculum was all about preparing them to be dutiful wives to colonial officers or just compliant domestic laborers.
Right.
Their entire value was tied to their ability to maintain a proper British-style household in a foreign land.
Okay, wait, I have to stop you there. Because if these boys were trained so intensely from childhood to be the perfect colonial middle managers,
Yeah.
and they fully internalized these British values, why didn't they just seamlessly assimilate into British society when the empire eventually withdrew? I mean, they had the training, they spoke the language, they followed the religion.
What's fascinating here is that the training was actually a trap.
A trap.
Yeah. It created a whole generation of what scholars now call Midnight's orphans.
Midnight's orphan.
Yes, because the British trained them to revere the empire, but the British never, ever viewed them as racial equals.
Oh, I see.
They were left in this incredibly precarious liminal space, taught to be the moral agents of the empire, but permanently locked out of the actual upper echelons of power.
That is just a profound betrayal. You're raised by an institution that demands your absolute loyalty, but then they hold you at arm's length forever.
And the text gives this heartbreaking, concrete example of this betrayal with the author's own grandfather, Teddy Bell.
Right.
So Teddy fought for the British in World War I. He put his life on the line, fully embodying that imperial duty he was raised to revere.
He did exactly what he was trained to do.
Exactly. Yet upon his enlistment, the British military officially categorized him racially as sallow.
Sallow.
Yeah.
Not British, not a patriot, just a slightly off-color complexion.
Exactly.
I mean, he's bleeding for the crown, and the crown is basically stamping a color line warning on his forehead to make sure he knows his place.
Precisely. That word sallow, it was a ceiling on his career, his social standing, his entire identity.
Wow.
And this early, intense training in hierarchy and emotional suppression, it had severe cascading consequences for these men.
I can imagine.
They were expected to be these towering figures of British authority, but when the empire withdrew, they had nowhere to direct that conditioned authority. They were suddenly men without a country and without a purpose.
So what happens to all that pent-up, militarized energy?
Well, according to the text, in many cases, it mutated into severe domestic tyranny.
Oh, no.
Yeah. These men developed an empire fetish.
An empire fetish.
Yes. It was this desperate, almost pathological longing for the British father that had abandoned them. And because they were utterly powerless in the changing political landscape of an independent India, they took out that frustration, that need for hierarchical control on the only people they could.
Their families.
Their own wives and children.
So these men are coming home psychologically fractured, obsessed with the Phantom Empire, and taking it out on their families.
Yeah.
That creates a massive vacuum. Someone has to actually hold the community together, which forces the women to transform the domestic space from a quiet sanctuary into a cultural stronghold.
Right. The actual day-to-day work of survival fell entirely on the women.
And this is exactly where Dr. Lewis introduces the central framework of the paper, isn't it? The counter-genealogy.
Yes, because standard genealogy is deeply patriarchal.
Like following the family tree.
Exactly. When you trace a standard family tree, you're usually just following property lines.
Who owned the house, who had the money.
Right. Who was the father? Who passed down the surname? It's a history of official ownership.
A history of who had the legal power.
Exactly. But a counter-genealogy is a method of reading history by looking at the gaps in those official records. It traces lineage through women's labor, through domestic spaces, and through something the scholar Sarah Ahmed calls effective economies.
Effective economies. Let's break that down for the listener because it sounds like heavy academic jargon, but it's actually a really beautiful concept.
It is. Think of it this way. In a normal economy, money is the currency that keeps society functioning, right?
Right.
In an affective economy, emotions, acts of care, and domestic rituals circulate like moral capital.
Okay, I see.
When a state refuses to recognize your identity, cooking a specific traditional meal or preserving a photograph isn't just a chore. It is an active investment in your culture's survival.
It's the mechanism of belonging. When your passport fails you, a recipe becomes your currency.
Exactly.
And speaking of photographs as currency, the visual evidence provided in the source for this counter-genealogy is just stunning.
It really brings it to life.
It does. Let me paint a picture for you, the listener, of one of the photographs included in the paper. It's of the author's great-grandmother, Una Grant.
The one who wrote the letter?
The very same. So this photo was taken in the central business district of Perth, Australia in the 1950s. And let me tell you, she does not look like someone who is quietly fading into the background or submitting to domestic tyranny.
Not at all.
Una looks incredibly formidable. She's sturdy, wearing this heavy dark coat with a thick fur collar. She's got a dark hat pulled down, round glasses, and she is tightly clutching this heavy leather handbag like it contains state secrets.
I love that description.
She just looks like a woman who absolutely runs things.
And her mind was just as sharp and uncompromising as her physical presence. Which brings us back to that 1954 letter you mentioned at the very beginning.
The Mammon Letter.
Yes. Here is Una, a marginalized Anglo-Indian woman who has migrated to suburban Perth. And she is casually writing blistering critiques of American interventionism and global geopolitics.
Right. Holding the H-bomb and the poisonous germs. Why is she writing about that? What does her geopolitical awareness actually tell us?
It tells us that these women were not confined to the narrow domestic spheres the empire tried to force them into.
Right, the Christian domesticity.
Exactly. They were fiercely intellectual, highly observant, and deeply aware of the global power structures that had dictated their entire lives. And the amazing thing is, Una passed this intellectual, fierce independence down.
She did.
Yes, there's another letter in the archive from her daughter, Great-Aunt Doris, written way back in 1923.
Wait, 1923. What is Doris writing about back then?
Doris is writing a complete rejection of the patriarchal pressures of marriage.
Wow.
In the 1920s, marriage was largely an economic transaction, especially for women in precarious social positions.
Of course.
But Doris writes that submitting to men is a weakness that only enables male selfishness. She flat out demands that any marriage must be based on what she calls a sympathy of ideals.
Sympathy of ideals.
It's an incredibly modern feminist demand for intellectual and emotional equality.
I have to say, this completely flips the script on how we are taught history.
It does.
Because usually, when we think of the 1920s or the 1950s, the cultural image we are fed is absolute domestic submission. You know, the classic quiet housewife waiting for her husband to come home.
The standard narrative.
Right. But these letters make the Anglo-Indian family home sound less like a quiet sanctuary and more like a secret headquarters for feminist rebellion.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, that rebellion was the exact engine of their cultural survival.
Right.
Because the men were so heavily compromised by the psychological baggage of the British Empire, they were often paralyzed.
They were stuck.
So it was the women who had to do the heavy lifting of maintaining their Anglo-Indian identity. They used the only tools available to them.
Like the cooking.
Exactly. Cooking hybrid dishes like mulligatawny and pish-pash wasn't just making dinner. It was insisting on their mixed heritage. Meticulously curating family photo albums, writing these intense philosophical letters to one another. This was moral maintenance.
Moral maintenance, that's a powerful term.
They were actively building an archive of who they were, completely independent of what the colonial government or their broken husbands said they were.
So we've seen how these Anglo-Indian women built this incredibly robust, resilient world inside the home. But eventually you have to step out the front door, right?
You do.
You can't live in the archive forever. What happened when they took these carefully curated identities out into the modern nations they lived in? The paper shifts here to compare how Australia and India reacted to this community, and it is a fascinating, sometimes brutal look at two very different types of multiculturalism.
Yeah, the author describes these national reactions as ambivalent multiculturalism.
Ambivalent.
Yes. Let's look at the Australian context first. In the early to mid-20th century, Australia operated under the overtly racist White Australia policy.
Right, which was notoriously strict.
Very. It was designed to keep the country as British and white as possible. However, the author's great-grandmother, Una, and her family actually managed to migrate to Western Australia prior to 1947.
Wait, how did they get past the color line tests if the policy was so strict?
Because legally, they were classified as British subjects.
Ah, the loophole.
Yes, that legal loophole allowed them to dodge some of the most stringent restrictions. However, it came at a massive cost.
I bet.
To survive in ultra-white Perth, they had to severely downplay and sometimes completely hide their Indian heritage.
So they get their foot in the door, but they essentially have to leave half of their identity on the welcome mat.
Exactly.
And the paper argues that even when Australia officially shifted toward multiculturalism later in the century, it wasn't exactly a free-for-all celebration of diversity.
Far from it. Dr. Lewis argues that Australian multiculturalism was conditional, or a white multiculturalism.
What does that mean in practice?
It meant you were welcome to live there, but only if you assimilated seamlessly into the dominant liberal civic culture. Your diversity was acceptable as long as it wasn't disruptive.
Don't rock the boat.
Right. It was an inclusion based entirely on acting as British or white as possible in public.
And then you have India, which the paper describes as taking almost the exact opposite approach historically.
Correct.
India, post-independence, was built on a foundation of secular pluralism, the idea that many different religious and ethnic groups could share power and space. But Dr. Lewis observes in the paper that this historical secular pluralism is currently eroding under the pressure of majoritarian Hindutva, or Hindu nationalist, politics.
Yes, and it's fascinating how Dr. Lewis frames India's recent political shifts to illustrate this erosion. She specifically points to two legislative changes, just looking strictly at the text here.
Yep.
First, the text highlights the 2019 Citizenship Law Amendment. Dr. Lewis observes that this law selectively grants citizenship to migrants based on their religion, which she argues shapes immigration flows in an exclusionary way, moving away from those secular principles.
And there was a second law that targeted the Anglo-Indian community specifically, right? Just reporting on what's in the paper.
Yes, the 104th Constitutional Amendment Act of 2020. So since India's independence, the Anglo-Indian community had guaranteed parliamentary representation in the Lok Sabha, which is the lower house of India's parliament.
Oh, so they had dedicated seats.
Exactly. It was a constitutional acknowledgement of their unique minority status. But the 2020 amendment formally erased that guaranteed representation. Their dedicated seats were simply removed.
So what does this all mean? If I had to use an analogy, multiculturalism is often sold to us as this beautiful, welcoming mosaic, right? Where every unique piece is valued and fits perfectly together to make a whole.
That's the ideal, yeah.
But based on how Dr. Lewis describes the experience of the Anglo-Indian community, it sounds much more like a nightclub where the bouncer keeps arbitrarily changing the dress code while you're waiting in line.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it.
In Australia, the bouncer tells you that you have to pretend you don't have Indian roots just to get in the door. And in India, you're suddenly told your roots aren't the right kind anymore to guarantee you a seat at the VIP table.
In both nations, the state assumes the ultimate power to dictate the terms of belonging, and it leaves the Anglo-Indian community in this perpetual state of anxiety.
Always having to prove their worth.
Always having to justify their existence to whatever government is in charge. And this brings the paper to its most emotional present-day element.
Right.
After meticulously laying out all this historical and political context, Dr. Lewis takes us on her own physical journey. Following the death of her mother, she actually travels back to Kolkata.
And this isn't just a simple heritage tour. Dr. Lewis is returning to India as a queer and trans academic. That adds this incredibly complex layer of internal dissonance to the journey. She is actively searching for family belonging in connection to her roots, but she's also hyper-aware of how she might be perceived. Because the Anglo-Indian community historically prides itself on very strict, often conservative, Christian respectability politics.
Yes, and there is a profound vulnerability in this part of the text. She expresses a deep, completely understandable fear of being judged as an outsider by her own people.
Of course.
She describes walking into the Calcutta Anglo-Indian Service Society, or CIS, located in the Taltala neighborhood. And she admits to being apprehensive about being judged on her physical appearance or her lack of religious piety.
But the reality of what she finds inside that building is incredible. It completely circles back to the very beginning of our conversation.
It really does. What she finds inside CI is a profound modern-day continuation of that female-led moral maintenance we talked about with Una and Doris.
She meets a woman named Philomena, who has been running this service society for 49 years.
Almost half a century.
Almost half a century of daily labor. And Philomena is doing exactly what the women in the 1920s and 50s were doing, just on an institutional scale.
Yes.
She isn't writing political treaties. She's providing welfare. She's organizing technical training for the youth. She's helping families pay school fees. She's literally helping the elderly in the community manage their diabetes.
It's that exact same effective care-based labor.
It is love and survival put into physical action.
And amidst observing all this labor, the author experiences these sharp, poignant poignant moments of emotional contrast that really capture the diaspora experience.
Oh, like with Michael.
Exactly. On one hand, she meets this older gentleman named Michael, and incredibly, Michael knows the exact streets in suburban Perth where the author grew up
Wow, small world.
because his own daughter had migrated to the exact same area.
It's this invisible transnational bridge, thousands of miles apart, but instantly connected by a shared geography of migration.
It's a beautiful moment of deep bonding. But then in the very next breath, she speaks with another community member named Colin, and Colin provides a sobering reality check.
What does he say?
Well, despite the rich heritage, the vibrant social clubs, the shared history, and the tireless work of people like Philomena, Colin makes a tragic admission to her. Regarding the current political and social climate in India, he simply tells her, "We feel unsafe."
Wow. It's so striking and honestly a little haunting. You read that and you think history is just repeating itself in a different century?
It really feels that way.
Are modern leaders like Philomena essentially doing the exact same moral maintenance work that Una and Doris did a century ago, just trying to hold a frightened community together against the pressures of the state?
This raises an important question about the very nature of human resilience. When a community is historically manufactured and then marginalized by a massive empire, and then subsequently sidelined by the modern nations they live in, how do they actually survive?
Right.
The answer this paper provides, definitively, is that they survive through local effective labor. They don't survive because a government passes a law protecting them.
No.
They survive because someone like Philomena is running the local welfare office. They survive because someone is cooking the meals, someone is saving the photographs, and someone is essentially insisting on their own existence when the official state records try to erase them.
Here's where it gets really interesting and why this matters so deeply to you sitting there listening right now. You don't have to be Anglo-Indian to take something massive away from this deep dive.
Not at all.
We all have those official family trees we talked about at the beginning. You know, those neat little boxes with names and dates, birth certificates, property deeds.
Yeah.
But Dr. Lewis's paper proves that the real story, your family's true countergenealogy, probably isn't in those official records.
It's definitely not.
It is hiding in your grandmother's recipe box. It's in a faded photograph where someone is gripping a handbag a little too tightly. It's in a forgotten, angry letter tucked away in the attic. Those aren't just keepsakes. Those are the actual living documents of human survival.
Which leaves us with a fascinating and maybe slightly uncomfortable thought to ponder for our own lives.
Yeah.
In our modern era, where our lives are perfectly rigidly curated on digital timelines and social media profiles,
Oh, right.
what are the messy, everyday domestic artifacts we're leaving behind?
Oh, nature.
Centuries from now, when someone tries to write our counter genealogies, to find the gaps between what the state said we were and who we actually were, where will they look to find the truth?
That is a brilliant, provocative question to leave off on. Are we leaving behind a polished, artificial digital tree, or are we leaving behind the real, tangled roots that tell the truth of who we were? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into counter-genealogies of belonging. We hope it sparked some massive aha moments for you today. Keep digging into those hidden histories, keep questioning the official narratives, and most importantly, keep learning.